After standing by my mother-in-law's side during a critical period in her life, she repaid me in the most unexpected way by suggesting that my husband get a DNA test after she met my son for the first time. Despite everything I had done for her, her expression turned ghostly pale when my husband responded to her suggestion. Now, after 25 years of marriage, her own relationship is falling apart because my father-in-law is demanding paternity tests for all 5 of their children, leaving her furious. Just a few days ago, I welcomed my first child into the world. 3 days ago, my mother-in-law, Jenny, decided to visit for the first time to meet her newest grandchild. My history with Jenny goes way back. When I was still dating my husband, I had taken care of her for nearly 3 months while she was recovering from a severe car accident. The initial weeks were incredibly tough, and I stayed by her side through it all. Thankfully, she pulled through, and I thought she would at least appreciate what I had done for her. But honestly, it seemed to mean nothing to her. That was almost 4 years ago, and a lot has changed since then. At that time, my husband and I had only been together for 6 months, but 3 years ago, we got married, and just recently, we had our first baby together. I assumed that would be enough for my mother-in-law to accept me as part of the family, but clearly, I was wrong. The moment she met our son, she made a snide remark about me and went as far as to suggest that my husband should take a paternity test to confirm if the baby was actually his. For some context, Jenny made this accusation and also skipped my child's birth, even though she had attended the births of all her other grandchildren, because of a situation that had unfolded a few months earlier. One of my ex-boyfriends, who I had dated for 5 months before meeting my husband, resurfaced and caused chaos in my life. For reasons beyond my understanding, he became obsessed with me and wouldn't stop contacting me, even after I blocked him. He had backed off for a while after I got married, but then suddenly reappeared, posting online about how he was still in love with me and believed that I felt the same way. His post was completely delusional. He even accused me of having an affair with him while leading him on for months, only to cut him off and block him everywhere after learning I was pregnant. He went as far as to claim that my baby could be his and that he wouldn't let me take away his supposed fatherhood. It was an absolute nightmare and deeply distressing for me. My husband and I had to consult a lawyer to handle the situation, and the entire ordeal was overwhelming. But instead of showing any sympathy, Jenny only made things worse. She picked fights with me, dropped passive-aggressive comments, and acted as if my ex's baseless accusations might actually be true. Naturally, we clashed, and I ended up calling her ungrateful. That argument led to months of silence between us. Then, the following day, my in-laws came to visit. To our surprise, Jenny showed up with them, along with my father-in-law and my husband's siblings. My husband and I weren't exactly thrilled about it, but before we could react, my father-in-law pulled us aside and whispered that she had come to apologize. I wasn't eager to hear it, but with my newborn in my arms, I decided to hold back. I didn't want to create any more drama. As everyone gathered around my son, Jenny kept her distance, making faces as if we were contagious. My husband and I were completely baffled by her behavior because, based on what my father-in-law had told us, we expected her to apologize. Instead, she acted like she was above the whole situation and barely acknowledged us. My father-in-law must have sensed our frustration because, after a while, he suggested that Jenny hold the baby. That turned out to be a colossal mistake. She coldly refused, stating that she wasn't about to hold some random baby just because I claimed he was her grandson. Then, she turned to my husband and declared that she would only acknowledge our son if we agreed to a paternity test. Her words were beyond insulting, and I was ready to say something, but before I could, my husband lost it. He told her that if she had no intention of apologizing, fine, but she shouldn't have bothered coming at all if this was how she planned to act. He then called her ungrateful, reminding her that when she was struggling after her accident, I was the one who cared for her while most of her own children were too busy with their own lives. And considering the fact that she has 5 kids, that said a lot. She didn't respond, just kept staring at him, but that only fueled his frustration. Then, in a moment that changed everything, he told her that if anyone should be asking for a paternity test, it should be his father, since she had her own fair share of skeletons in the closet. That was a bombshell. Jenny had always maintained a spotless image and a stellar reputation, so my husband's implication was deeply damaging. But the way her face dropped, I knew he had struck a nerve. Within seconds, she erupted, screaming and cursing at him. I had to step in and tell everyone to take their argument outside because I didn't want them disturbing the baby. I didn't witness what happened next firsthand, which I now regret, but my husband later filled me in. He told me that after he asked his entire family to leave, Jenny continued screaming at him from the driveway. She refused to back down until he finally threatened to call the police on her. Once things settled and he came back inside, he explained what he had meant by his earlier comment. It turns out that my supposedly flawless mother-in-law had been unfaithful at some point in her marriage, something my father-in-law had been completely unaware of until recently. My husband had accidentally discovered the truth when he was younger, but he had never spoken about it to anyone, to the point where he had nearly forgotten about it himself. Now, though, the secret was out. A few days have passed since the incident, and from what we know, my father-in-law is now demanding paternity tests for all 5 of his children. He clearly took my husband's words seriously, and Jenny is doing everything she can to prevent those tests from happening. My husband, on the other hand, has refused to clarify anything to his father. He's keeping his mouth shut because, in his mind, if anyone is going to address this, it has to be Jenny. He wants her to own up to the truth herself. And just to be clear, it's not because he wants to protect her. It's because he knows that coming from her, it will be the ultimate humiliation. Honestly, I completely understand where he's coming from. Jenny is now absolutely livid and has been bombarding us with texts nonstop. But, of course, we blocked her. That didn't stop her, though. She showed up at our house again. This time, I refused to let her in, and she completely lost it. She stood outside, hurling insults at me, calling me every name imaginable, and ranting about how, unlike me, she had never given her husband any reason to doubt her. She demanded that my husband clear her name and admit that he had fabricated the entire thing. But I know the truth. I know that he didn't make anything up. Honestly, I couldn't help myself. I laughed right on the other side of the door and told her that, if anything, she was actually worse than me. At least I hadn't cheated on my husband. I was just falsely accused because of a deranged ex. That set her off even more, and she started spewing even more insults. But when she dragged my parents into it, that's when I completely snapped. I told her that, looking back, I wished I had never helped her recover after her accident. I regretted every second of it and should have just left her to fend for herself, just like all her kids had. I wasn't trying to be logical. I just wanted to hurt her, and I guess I succeeded because she stormed off after that. Unfortunately, my husband took my words personally. Now, he thinks that I was taking a jab at him too, but that wasn't my intention at all. I know that he wasn't there for his mother as much as he wanted to be, not because he didn't care, but because he had to work. At that stage in his career, dropping everything simply wasn't an option, and despite that, he had still done far more than his siblings. While I cared for his mother during the day, he made sure she was looked after at night. It's a sore subject for him, and I've been trying to explain that I never meant to insult him. But last night, he broke down over it, and now I feel awful. I never meant to hurt him. I just wanted to put Jenny in her place. So, does that make me the asshole for bringing up something that ended up hurting my husband instead? Update 1. Okay, you guys were right. I owed my husband a huge apology. What I said was completely out of line, and the truth is, it hurt him more than it hurt his mother. I've been feeling overwhelmed and emotionally drained these past few days, and, honestly, postpartum hormones have been hitting me hard. Any mom can probably relate. Having a baby is no small thing. That's not an excuse for my words, though. I was wrong, and I sincerely apologized to him. Thankfully, we've worked things out, and everything is fine between us now. So, that's one problem down. But my in-laws? Their marriage is still an absolute disaster. And honestly, I think it's about time Jenny got a taste of her own medicine. She's been nothing but cruel to me recently, and if anyone deserves some karma, it's her. For the record, Jenny has never once shown even the slightest bit of gratitude for the 3 months I spent taking care of her after her accident. Her husband wasn't in a position to look after her either, as he had to focus on running his business. Her 2 eldest children lived out of state and only managed to visit for a few days before heading back to their jobs. Her daughter was preoccupied with her own family, which meant that, in the end, it was just my husband and me left to care for her. At the time, her youngest child was still in high school, so it wasn't like she could drop everything to help. Even my husband didn't spend as much time with her as I did. mostly because I was working night shifts back then, which made it easier for me to be around during the day. And let's not forget, I wasn't even married to him at that point. I was just his girlfriend. I had absolutely no obligation to do any of that. But I did it anyway, simply because I loved him. The least I expected was some form of appreciation. Instead, once she recovered, she acted as though it never happened. Even then, I tried not to let it get to me. I told myself it didn't matter because I loved my husband. But she was always cold toward me for no reason. And as you all know, things between us only worsened over time. So no, I don't feel even a little bit sorry for what she's dealing with right now. As for how my husband found out about her affair, well, that's a whole other wild story. He was actually quite young when it happened, and ironically, it was around the time that Jenny was heavily pregnant with his younger sister. Just for context, there's a 7-year age gap between them. He told me that one evening, all of his older siblings had gone with their father to attend a wedding, but he had stayed home because he was sick with the flu. Apparently, Jenny assumed he was asleep, so she let her affair partner into the house. My husband distinctly remembers waking up to the sound of shouting from downstairs. Since he was just a kid, he got scared and crept down to see what was going on. What he witnessed was his father's business partner yelling at Jenny, accusing her of trying to take his baby away from him. He told her that he loved her and that she needed to leave her husband because, deep down, she knew she loved him too. My husband said that, throughout the argument, Jenny never even tried to deny anything. She just kept shouting at the man to get out. That was what had woken him up. At the time, he was too young to fully grasp what was happening, so he didn't question it. It wasn't until he was 13 that he finally confronted his mother about it. But instead of explaining anything, she completely lost it. She screamed at him for making up stories and told him never to speak about it again. That moment stayed with him, permanently burned into his memory. He never brought it up again until now. Honestly, I'm really glad he finally said something because it just confirms what I've always suspected. Jenny has been fake and pretentious her entire life. She spent years projecting this image of herself as the perfect wife and mother, acting like no one could ever measure up. I may not be particularly close with my brothers-in-law's wives, but I'd bet anything they'd agree with me. One thing I've noticed about Jenny, she thrives on tearing other women down. As of now, my husband still hasn't told his father the full details of what he overheard that day. It's been nearly a week since everything blew up, and Jenny still hasn't come clean to her husband. Instead, she's trying to twist the situation to make my husband look like a liar. Naturally, this has only made things worse. From what my husband's siblings have told him, their father is now determined to have a paternity test done for all of his children. He's managed to put the pieces together and suspects that my husband's comment was pointing towards something bigger. Meanwhile, Jenny is resisting the idea, claiming that it's humiliating for her husband to question their children's paternity after so many years of marriage. I genuinely feel bad for my father-in-law. But Jenny? Not so much. In the end, though, it's up to my husband to decide when he wants to tell his dad the full story. Update 2. Hey, quick update. I realized I never clarified exactly what happened with the business partner, which has understandably left a lot of you confused. That was my oversight. I've just been incredibly overwhelmed and scatterbrained with everything going on. Anyway, Jenny's former affair partner is no longer in the picture. He actually passed away a few years ago. Somehow, she managed to keep him silent about their affair for all these years. That brings us to the biggest unknown, whether my husband's younger sister is actually his full biological sibling or only his half-sister. Back then, Jenny never had a paternity test done, or at least, if she did, we have no idea what the results were. And unless she agrees to get one now, we may never know the truth. My husband's siblings have been trying to stay as far away from the drama as possible. On one side, their father is pushing for a paternity test. On the other, Jenny has flat out forbidden them from taking one. Up until now, they've been using the excuse that they would only go through with it if everyone agreed unanimously, mainly to avoid stirring up even more tension. I understand why they took that approach, but I have a feeling that's about to change. 9 days have passed since the initial confrontation, and this morning, my husband finally sent a message to the entire family. He laid out exactly what he had overheard all those years ago, explaining why he strongly believes their mother hasn't been entirely faithful throughout her marriage. So far, most of his siblings have yet to respond, except for his youngest sister, who took the news very hard. We feel awful for her, but unfortunately, there's nothing we can do to soften this blow. She's still in her early 20s, and life is already complicated enough at that age. This revelation has undoubtedly made things even harder for her. Because of that, we've offered to let her move in with us for a while. She's currently living in an apartment that her parents pay for, so she might need a place to stay if things escalate further. She hasn't accepted our offer yet, but we'll see what happens. As for the paternity tests, we have no idea if my husband's siblings will go through with them now. However, I have a feeling that his youngest sister might agree to it. I truly hope, for her sake, that the results confirm she's her father's daughter. She hasn't done anything wrong, and she's a genuinely good person. She doesn't deserve to be caught up in this mess. At the end of the day, my husband and I never intended for things to spiral this far. We only wanted to prove to my father-in-law that Jenny had been unfaithful. Unfortunately, this situation has become far more complicated than we ever expected. Update 3. Hey, it's been 2 weeks since my last update, and yes, my sister-in-law did end up going through with the paternity test. The rest of my husband's siblings opted out, including my husband himself, since there was never any doubt about his paternity. Unfortunately, the results confirmed what we all feared. She is not my father-in-law's biological daughter. That only solidifies the story my husband remembered from his childhood, proving that he hadn't been imagining things after all. We found out about this last week when my father-in-law called my husband. He simply told him that he now knew the truth, thanked him, and before my husband could even respond, he hung up. And just like that, it was settled. We really feel for my sister-in-law, though she's the one hurting the most in all of this. As for what's happening with Jenny and my father-in-law's marriage, we have no clue anymore. They've stopped involving the rest of the family in their issues, which, honestly, is probably for the best. My sister-in-law told us that, for now, she wants to stay in her apartment, even though her parents are still paying for it. She feels deeply betrayed by her mother, and I completely understand why. She doesn't blame her father, because, really, none of this is his fault, and we're respecting her decision to stay where she is for now. I hate seeing my husband so down about everything happening within his family. It's clear that he feels terrible about it, and I can tell it weighs on him. But the truth is, this was bound to come out sooner or later. If anything, I remind him that the only reason he even brought any of this up in the first place was to defend me. His mother had been relentlessly attacking me for no reason, and he refused to let her get away with it. That, to me, just proves how good of a husband he is. And more importantly, it shows that he's going to be an amazing father. Because, at the end of the day, his priority has always been his family, the one we're building together. Yes, his parents and siblings are his family too, but what's happening between them now is out of his control. He keeps blaming himself, thinking that if he had never said anything, none of this would have come to light. But the reality is, this is all on Jenny. She's the one who lied. She's the one who cheated, and ultimately, she's the one who triggered this entire situation. And I know this might sound selfish, but as a new mom, I can't help but feel resentful that she's casting a shadow over what should be some of the happiest days of our lives. These early days with our baby are moments we'll never get back, yet so much of our time is consumed by drama that she created. And the worst part? It didn't have to be this way. She could have chosen to be a loving, supportive grandmother. We could have had a peaceful, happy family. But instead, she made it her mission to be a complete nightmare. Update 4. It's been 3 days since my last update, and we just heard from my husband's eldest brother. He reached out to let us know that Jenny had called him in the middle of the night, crying hysterically. According to her, after days of complete silence, my father-in-law finally made his decision. He packed his bags, told her she'd be receiving the divorce papers in a few days, and walked out. Jenny was apparently inconsolable over the phone, and my husband's brother said someone needed to be with her to make sure she didn't do anything reckless. I guess, once again, they were expecting me to step up, which is absolutely insane. Have they not been paying attention to everything that's happened? Regardless, my husband made it crystal clear to his brother that we are not in a position to be there for her right now. We have a newborn to care for, and even if we didn't, we certainly wouldn't be rushing to her side after everything she's done. Thankfully, his brother didn't push back or try to argue, which was a relief, because if he had, it would have led to an even bigger rift between them. My husband already has a strained relationship with his siblings as it is, and we definitely don't need to make things worse. After that conversation, my husband decided to check in with his father. At first, my father-in-law didn't answer his calls, but eventually, he got back to us a couple of days ago. He told us that, for now, he's staying with a friend but will soon start looking for his own place. It had taken him a few days to fully come to terms with everything and decide whether or not he wanted to leave his wife for good. But in the end, he realized that he needed to walk away. The biggest thing holding him back had been the history they shared, the life they built together, the family they raised. He struggled with the idea of throwing all of that away over something that had happened so long ago. But then it hit him. Jenny was the one who had thrown it all away first. And more than that, who's to say this was the only time it ever happened? That thought alone was enough to make up his mind. Honestly, he has a point. We reassured him that we'd be there if he needed emotional support or anything else. But he told us to focus on our own family and not get too caught up in everything going on with him and Jenny. And he's right. So for now, we're going to try and do just that. Update 5. It's been a week since my father-in-law officially filed for divorce, and so far, my husband and I have been keeping our distance from all the chaos. Just like my father-in-law advised, we've been focusing on our own family instead. My husband even told his siblings that, for now, he doesn't want to hear any updates about their parents because, at the end of the day, there's nothing he can do to change the situation. Thankfully, they've respected his wishes and haven't been keeping him in the loop. Honestly, this has been the most peaceful we've felt in a while. Ever since we stepped back, our state of mind has improved significantly. So, I guess my father-in-law was right. It really is better for us to just stay out of it. But, of course, Jenny had to find a way to pull us back in. This morning, she sent us an absolutely hateful email, accusing us of destroying her marriage. She wasted no time placing the blame squarely on us, writing that she hoped we were happy now that we had successfully ruined a marriage that had lasted nearly 40 years. From there, the email spiraled into a full-on rant. She called us every name imaginable and even went so far as to say that she no longer considered my husband her son. According to her, it was unacceptable that her own flesh and blood would betray her like this. And, of course, she couldn't resist throwing in a final jab at me. She warned my husband that I would eventually ruin his life too, because, in her mind, I had been the mastermind behind all of this, deliberately stirring up drama in the family. Apparently, I was the one who had allowed my husband to make that disgusting comment defending me. Honestly, as we read through her ridiculous email, my husband and I couldn't do anything but roll our eyes at how utterly delusional she sounded. We talked about it afterward, and my husband admitted that, while he does feel bad that his parents' marriage is falling apart, he knows it's not his fault. The fact that his mother is trying to blame us for the consequences of her own actions is just absurd. She did this to herself. Yet, instead of taking responsibility, she's trying to make us the villains in her story.